So,
You go
hi
ahead.
everyone. I welcome you on behalf of Belongg. Just a little bit about Belongg. Belongg is a social venture that seeks to bring discrimination free services and community experiences to people who face prejudice and bias due to their identities. Today, the event is a collaborative effort between Belong Mental Health Collective and Belong Literature Collective. So, a little bit about both the collectives. Belong Mental Health Collective is a platform that seeks to address the intersection of identities, identity based discrimination, and mental health. On the other hand, Belong Literature Collective is a part of Belong that aims to spread diverse and inclusive literature along across the country. The Library Network is a network of culture and literary spaces across India that will have lending libraries curated by us, as well as regular literary events themed around diversity and inclusion. There are 22 chapters in 17 cities right now, and that's about it about Belong. Just a little bit about our guest for today, and that is Ms. Gopika Kapoor. Ms. Gopika Kapoor is an autism consultant and writer. When her son Veer, then aged 3, was diagnosed with autism, Gopika Kapoor decided that she would do whatever it took to help him and other children with autism learn and reach their potential. Gopika joined Ummi Child Development Center, which works with children with developmental disabilities. Starting out as a junior therapist, Gopika rose to lead therapist uh, and master trainer. For 10 years, she provided therapy to over 400 families and also conducted over 100 training sessions on varied aspects of autism and its management in Mumbai, Delhi, Goa, Gujarat, and Bangladesh. She coordinated and conducted the WHO caregiver skills training programs, pre pilot, and pilot sessions across 3 sites in Mumbai. Gopika left Umeed in 2020 to write Beyond the Blue to help other parents on this journey. She consults with them individually to help them accept the diagnosis, find the best therapy plan for the child, answer questions on schoolings, leisure, and social activities, puberty and adolescence, and serve as a source of support for them. Uh, just to inform you that, our session is coinciding with Children Mental Health Week, and so we are really honored to be doing this session with Ms. Gopika today. The moderator for today's session is Mallika. Mallika Sarang is a graduate in psychology and has done her postgraduate from Ambedkar University. Her inclination is towards working with children, and she has recently started working as a counselor with an organization that works with lower income groups in Delhi and nearby areas. Today's event is also in collaboration with our Bangalore Library Chapter, which is Lahe Lahe. So, Mansi, do you want to introduce Lahe Lahe?
Hello, I'm so honored to be here and looking forward to the conversation today. Lahe Lahe, for the people who are not aware, is an expressions place in Bangalore which celebrates and nurtures the art of all forms, that is, music, poetry, theatre, pottery, and dance and various forms of arts, including literature. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation between Gopika and Malika today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Malika, do you want to take forward the session?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Saransh. And thank you, Team Belong, for having us here. It's an interesting conversation to have for sure. So I think I'm going to begin because we have very less time and I have a lot to discuss and ask Gopika about the book and about her experience throughout. So I'm going to begin with how, like, I read the book, and like we discussed, it was an interesting read, Beyond the Blues. So whatever chapters I had the opportunity to read, it's interesting to note that all the questions I had before reading the book were very smoothly and easily answered throughout the whole, just the few chapters I read. It almost covered every question I had. I had to sit down and think again as to what all should I be asking you or talking to you about. But I think I am going to pick these portions and bring them out here so that more people can hear it out and talk about it. It was a very raw and very reflective book, I would say, and a very honest conversation you have brought in through the book. I'll begin with the questioning. Um, yeah, so I mean, like it's a book about a caregiver of an autistic individual, and I think I'd like to begin there. Um, and like I would like you to share your experience and thoughts as a mother of a neurotypical and a neuroatypical child. Like you had the best of both worlds, or whatever you want to, like however the experience was for you. So would you like to talk more on that?
Sure. I'll start by saying thank you to Zenia, everyone at Team Belong, Mansi, and Saransh for inviting me here. And thank you, Malika, because I think for your questions are extremely insightful and something which I am looking forward to answering. Yes, being the mother of one neurotypical child and one child who's on the autism spectrum, especially since they are twins, the same age, is a very interesting experience. When they were younger, it was extremely stressful because there was constantly points of comparison. I think as a society and globally even, we have come to expect perfection from our children. And this is something which is an increasingly growing trend. So forget about kids on the spectrum. Anybody who has a child who is shy, introverted, not as outgoing, maybe not academically as superior as other kids, maybe not as sporty. All these kids are then kind of bundled into this one basket, which is non-performing, average. You cannot be mediocre anymore. When I was growing up, it was okay to be mediocre. Now it is just almost become a culture where mediocrity is not tolerated at all, which I think is extremely dangerous because the kind of pressures that this puts on kids is really hard. But coming back to raising one neurotypical and one autistic child, it was very difficult at times, and at other times it was very easy because rather helpful to have my daughter around because Veer would look to her for how to behave and would copy her. So she was that direct role model which he had and continues to have, I would say. Balancing both needs and wants was something which was, I wouldn't say it was a struggle, but I would say it takes work. It continues to take work. So they're right now, they're both 16. They're in full teenage bloom. Both require me. Both have raging hormones. And they're both at a stage where I need to be able to balance the needs of both emotional needs, the academic needs, the needs where somebody just needs to talk to you right now at this point of time, and they both need to talk to me. But I think the way I have come to look at it is that it makes life more interesting, and it's quite a circus in my house. So I quite enjoy it.
Wow, very interesting to hear all of that. So like you have talked about your time, like when you got the diagnosis in the book, and so I mean, I'd like to begin with this question so that more people know what autism really
Sure.
is. So whenever somebody asks me like what do I do and like who do I work with, it's difficult for me to really tell them like so that like I do tell them I work with kids, but it's very difficult to make a differentiation and particularly tell them about autism. I just it's like to draw a line and tell them that something like intellectual disability is different from autism, and people generally think of intellectual disabilities whenever they are thinking about children. And so that's something I struggle with. I struggle with telling people who I work with. So, um, how do you tell people what autism is, especially those who haven't seen it or identified it, since so many cases go misdiagnosed, undiagnosed? So like, even you mentioned how you thought it would be dyslexia after watching Tare Zameen
Yes.
Par, but it turned out to be autism. So I have two questions: how do you explain somebody who has not seen autism what autism is, and like, what part like living through and with it made it clear to you how is it different from dyslexia or any other condition for that matter?
I will actually answer the second question first,
Yeah.
where how it was different from dyslexia. So I actually, when we was diagnosed, I didn't know much about dyslexia, nor did I know much about autism. I assumed it was dyslexia because this is just because the boy in Tare Zameen Par had dyslexia, so I just thought, okay, chalo, isko dyslexia hai, and I was kind of mentally prepared for a dyslexia diagnosis. I knew very little about autism at that time. What I did know is that there was something different about my kid, and that is what's caused me to seek a diagnosis. So, in that sense, that covers that part. I've had to explain autism in different languages to different people, and I will probably go with the explanation that I gave my daughter when she was 8 years old, when we had to explain to her that her brother is different from her and what this difference is. So basically, what we told her is that, look, his brain is wired different. Okay, why I keep stressing the word different over here is because I don't want to say it is wrong. I don't want to say it is less. The worst is what is put on Indian medical certificates. So and so suffers from autism. I hate that. There's no suffering involved here. Let's be absolutely clear about that. So the brain is wired differently. It thinks differently from you. It perceives differently from you. The senses and the sensory responses that come in are different from you. So that is how it works. So, for example, when Veer hears a pressure cooker, for example, he hears it much more intensely than you or I would, because his brain is wired to perceive these things differently. He finds it difficult to communicate with other people or to make friends because his ability to communicate socially is impacted. So again, talking about in terms of what is impacted, I think makes a big difference. Also, I like to talk about it in terms of what the strengths are. So he has an amazing memory, okay, because he he's on the spectrum. He will remember things that none of us will at home, because he's on the spectrum. So again, talking about it in terms of differences, I think helps everyone to just understand that just like you and I are different, you have short hair, I have long hair. Does that make you less than me or me less than you? No, we're just different about it. You live in Delhi, I live in Mumbai. That's different. So I think the more we start talking about this in terms of differences as opposed to disabilities and disorders, it will become much easier for people to accept. I was just talking to a colleague half an hour before this call, and we were just saying how we both really like the term. Autism has typically been coined autism spectrum disorder by the Americans. And Simon Baron Cohen, who's in the UK and is a British researcher, has for a long time referred to it as autism spectrum condition. And that makes it so much more, I don't know, palpable in a sense, because it's a condition. So when you tell somebody that somebody has a condition as opposed to a disorder, the kind of feeling it generates is so much more one of acceptance than the term disorder. So I would kind of explain it in those terms of
Yeah,
just being a difference.
thank you for that. Like, put these two things. I think I would highlight again the difference in wiring, and also it being more like a condition than a disorder, because then it's easier to understand the whole equation that revolves around autism and the dialogue around autism, and it also helps in inclusion more. Like, language works so strongly in such spaces.
Absolutely.
And thank you for giving those two words. But like, yeah, so I would continue with like, it has also a lot to do with how you think about things, and a
Yes.
perspective that comes, and like a very shift in the understanding of things and perceiving of things. And you have mentioned something about Vedanta in your book, in the chapters I got to read. Would you like to tell more about what about Vedanta? Because you have also mentioned how there's a lot of literature in the West about autism, and we have read all of that, but we don't have anything from within us, and like from the Eastern perspective,
Yes.
basically. And we need more books from here. And you have some understanding through Vedanta, and I'd like you to elaborate on that.
Sure. So if I can just clarify, there are two separate points in a sense. I'll talk about the second point first again. So when I said that there are a lot of books from the Western perspective, I meant that there are a lot of books about autism from the Western perspective. Now, as a culture, as a society, India and the countries on the subcontinent, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, are countries which are very culturally different from the West. Okay, our family dynamics are different, our society is different, our culture is different, everything is different, right? So, in that is respect, everything that has been published so far has been from like either the UK or the US or maybe Australia or maybe Europe, where countries and societies are so different. For example, nobody in the US would live in a joint family, right? Whereas so much of India lives in a joint family. So when it comes to things like, I'll give you a very small example, and I've written about this in my book. Uh, when it comes to implementing something like a gluten-free, casein-free diet, which was a buzzword, and it continues to be a buzzword in autism, which means basically you don't give the child wheat, you don't give the child dairy or any dairy products, and it's basically no gluten. Now, you try and tell an Indian joint family who is eating roti for dinner every day that I'm sorry, you can't eat roti because my child can't eat roti. This presents a very unique dilemma for the parents of this child, because how do you explain to these people that you can't eat roti, which is such an essential part of their culture, of their food. So these were things which I thought nobody had ever talked about. I come to the Vedanta bit. So I had been studying Vedanta from the time that I was pregnant with my twins. And this really shaped a lot of how I parented them. And it was, in fact, the subject of my first book, Spiritual Parenting, which was published by House India. And when, of course, they say that why should you be involved in a spiritual study practice? Because today everything may be going great in your life, but when things go not so great, and when you have to deal with the issues, that is when a spiritual practice will create that backbone. It will give you that backbone of resilience and will help you deal with those circumstances, because you are able to look at life with a lot more equanimity than to just completely be overcome by your difficulties. And so, like I said, I had been studying Vedanta for a while. And so when I received VH diagnosis, and of course, even then it took me a long time, but studying that having that spiritual practice in my life really helped. And as I have also written in my book, and as you must have read, it's each chapter is divided into two sections. One is my story, and one is just general information for people. That studies have shown, and I have seen this in my 10 years of practice at Umeed as well, where I used to work with families, that those families who have a deep spiritual connection, it could be a spiritual or religious connection, whatever it is, it could be any sort of practice they follow. Those families who have that faith and that belief are able to come out of that the trauma or the shock or the feelings, negative feelings that are associated after you get a diagnosis for your child, and are able to accept the situation better and start working with their children better. And like we all know, early intervention is key. That is what really helps kids progress. So those families who have that spiritual base are much more resilient in a sense, and are able to deal with the situation in a better way.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, you have to have some sort of understanding because it's just a general shift, like I said, in perspective. As soon as you get a diagnosis of autism, or you just see somebody with autism, you have to have a different understanding of normalcy or whatever, you know, the world has put on us to, cover up, like you've mentioned
Yeah.
earlier. um, since you talk about therapies, and like, can you talk more about, like, since you have practiced for quite a long time now, can you talk about more about the alternative therapies that you tried with V and you mentioned in the book also, and also how your journey has been through all of those alternative therapies, and what after that whole journey would you like, if you had to go back with all the information you have now, what would you begin with first? Like, what is that evidence based practice or therapy which generally works in kids with autism, as an early intervention?
As a parent, when you're told that your child has any sort of condition, it could be a neurodevelopmental condition like autism, it could be a genetic condition, it could be a medical condition. And of course, you try the medical route, of course, you try the therapeutic route. But because as a parent, you will do anything, and I mean literally anything to help your child, the tendency is to go the alternative route. Whether it works or not, the tendency is to go there. In our case, we really tried everything. So I remember we went to a faith healer. We would, go and meet a faith healer. I am by nature a skeptic, but even then, I said that whatever it takes, I will do. I went and tried a past life regressionist. I went and I tried some Ayurvedic treatments. So we tried pretty much everything. Um, we also tried a therapy called RDI, which was for us extremely stressful because as a therapy it's known to work, but for us it was a very stressful therapy. And of course, different kinds of ABA, as I'm sure you know, is more than just showing flashcards. It's much more than that. So we tried that. We tried literally everything that there was at that time to try. Having said that, I think if I were to go back and learn something, it would be this: that ultimately what kids need to learn, of course, we will try all the things. Are you need to first start engaging with them. And when I say engaging with them, you have to have a connection. Because if you don't have that connection, then it is impossible to teach them anything. So for the parent and the child, particularly, to have a connection is extremely important before you can teach them anything. The connection gives them, once you have a connection with them, they give you their attention, right? So when you get their attention, then you can teach them. The other thing, in all the years of therapy that I have done with kids also, is that kids with autism especially are very low on motivation because they have restricted interest. They will like one or two things, maybe, or three or four things, which they will totally want to play with. It could be a piece of string, it could be bottle caps, it could be plastic dabbas, it could be anything. It could just be a particular kind of dinosaur toy. These are what they like. And if we try to make them like what we want them to like, it's going to be a failure. So we need to go to them at their level, figure out what it is that they like, and use that to teach them. I have actually taught a child mathematics using cars because this is what the child liked. And so when his mother said that, we are doing maths in school and he doesn't know how to do maths, I said, okay, let's use the cars. So we actually would put two cars in this, make, two circles, draw two circles and say two cars here, two cars here. How much? Let's add them together. 1, 2, 3, 4. She said, how does he know maths? I said, because we used what he likes. So when you start using what kids like, you start teaching them. Once they become older, these likes can then be turned into vocations. So You must have, of course, heard about Temple Grandin and how she loved animals and how she loved to work with animals. And today she is professor of cattle, I think ranching and cattle science and psychology and stuff like that in Colorado. And it was just the fact that she liked this and she turned it into a career. And this is something which I'm not saying, she's saying it, and she's on the spectrum. So I think that is what I would say. One thing is to really, really start with the engagement and then use the likes. And the other thing I would say is to teach kids to be functional. Okay, when I say functional, I mean, can they tell the time? Can they add up money? There's no point learning quadratic equations if they're not going to be able to take away the money that they get from a shop and they're going to get gypped at shops every day. Can they use Google Maps? Can they independently go from one place to the other? Those are skills which we need to start stressing, and self-help skills also.
I think this is very, like, if we think about it, we are actually not really studying what we need to study, but when we see what is being taught to kids with autism, like a separate syllabus is made for each child, and
Yeah.
and that's actually about how you've got to live that life for which we are not
It's actually
prepared.
common sense, right?
Exactly.
I'm not saying something very fancy or anything. It's common
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
So that's what we've got to teach them.
Something we should be taught in schools anyway, like
True,
even in
very
neurotypical
true.
schools.
Absolutely, I agree
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah, so I'm since you're talking about intervention, and you've also like in the book you have written you have had a separate space on how there's a time period of bargain, like you just like in the process of grieving, there's a space wherein there's a bargain wherein a lot of time is lost. People lose years in that time. I would really like you to talk about the importance of early intervention when it comes to autism, and how much time we lose through all that bargain, and like how important it is to act quickly and not lose years over things that wouldn't help.
So I feel for any parent to accept, like I said, that child is different from others is very difficult. And so, of course, the first thing they will do is deny, right? I mean, that is the obvious. No, no, no. These things don't, like I said, I have written in the book, these things don't happen in our families like ours, These things don't happen to us. This can't happen to me. So there is that natural tendency to just say, no, this is not happening in my life and I refuse to accept it. Which is okay for a while, because I think until you come to terms with it, it's okay. But at the same time, you need to realize that your child needs help. I think with myself, as well as all the families that I've worked with, sometimes we would not use the A word, as we call it. And we would say, okay, fine, let's not talk about the diagnosis. But do you agree that this child needs help with XYZ? And the parents say yes, and say, okay, let's start working on it. So there is no denying the fact that that child needs help with those things. And so that's what you start working on. Because we know, as you very well know this, you are working in the field, that 80% of the child's brain develops in the first 3 years of life. We need to capitalize on that. We need to give them as much stimulation, as much input as possible during that time. And so the earlier we intervene, and I'm not talking about 40 hours of therapy a week, I'm just talking about naturalistic interventions as well. Of course, therapy is very, very important, but even in terms of the kind of intervention that we used to practice at Umeed, and that the autism team continues to practice at Umeed, which is naturalistic intervention. You take your child out and you're at the fruit wala and you say, show them, and you say, apple, look, it's red. Immediately the child has learned two things. It's a fruit. You've taught them three things: apple, red, fruit. These kind of things are natural. They don't require you to sit in a therapy room, don't require a therapist. The parent becomes the therapist. And I think that is something which I have said to parents over and over again. You are the expert of your child. You know this child best. I don't know your child best. You know your child best. So you need to really try and expose them to the world as much as you can.
Absolutely, no doubt about that. And just talking about people around and their denial of autism, the A word, and all of that, it brings me to meltdowns. Okay, so the meltdowns can be very taxing and
Yeah.
exhausting for both the kid and the caregiver around them. And you mentioned in the book how people would, like, when it's already very difficult when it's inside the house, and when you go out and it happens
Oh,
outside, I
it's
don't know
horrible.
how.
It's horrible.
I mean, you know it better. I have no idea. I've never seen any of my kids outside, or I have not personally seen any
Right.
meltdown outside, because probably people are not bringing their kids out, or kids with
Exactly. You said
autism
it.
out.
Yes.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and that's possibly a case. But like, so like, you have mentioned how you had to just shut out all the snide comments, and and then focus on how to take care of Veer in that moment, and just change in priorities, I see.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to talk about what all snide comments have you heard, what all bizarre comments you have heard, because I really need people to see how bizarre that thing is to do when you're in such a situation.
So, in India, we love giving advice, and advice is free, and we love it. So, you
Yeah.
will be sitting on a train, and some lady will say, "ये बोलता क्या नहीं है?" And you're like, oh God, why? So everybody from the woman on the train to the Kamwali guy to the bus conductor to the, I mean, you name it, they will all feel that it is their right to tell you what to do. So I have been asked why he was not speaking when he was, when he was speaking very less. I've been asked why, when sometimes he used to jump, why he was doing that. I've been asked, you know, what's wrong with him, which is horrible because what do you mean by saying what's wrong with him? And so I've been asked these things, but I will tell you that the advice that I have heard my patients tell me that has been given to them are extremely bizarre things. So somebody has told them to drink the water that has been drunk by a parrot. Okay, tote ka pani. I don't know if you've heard that one. Because parrots talk a lot, and so if the parrot drinks the water, which is obviously so unhygienic, and then you make the child drink the water, the child will speak. I think that is the most bizarre. That tops my list of most bizarre. Teka pani. It used to be actually like, how, and this is not one patient. This has been several patients who have told me about this. There were, of course, the people who used to take them. The kids, grandmothers would take the kids to babas and to sadhus and have tavis and rudraksh and you name it. Because as a country, we are extremely religious, and along with religious, we are extremely superstitious. And we refuse to accept that, this condition has been caused by neurons and by neuro kind of wiring in the brain, and by differences in the way the brain is wired. We'd rather believe that it's caused and can be cured by some baba. So yeah, there are a lot of stories. The tota is the weirdest one that I've heard.
If it were only like it were that easy, like, it's just very funny to hear that. But
Absolutely.
it also brings me, like, so if I see if I see a kid with autism having a meltdown outside and their parents are taking care of the child, what do you, as a passerby, expect me to do to help you out? Like, what is the correct thing to do?
I think it would be ideal in an ideal world, to just come and ask the parents, can I help you? Do you need me to get you some water? I think just that would be enough. Because, like I said, when a child is having a meltdown in public, the tendency is for people to look like that. And the tendency is to assume that you have a brat on your hands and that brat is creating a ruckus and is disturbing everybody. The worst is in trains, buses, airplanes, because here you're in a confined space and you can't go anywhere and you're just stuck in there. At least if you're in another public space, in a park or in a mall or whatever it is, you can move away But in places like these, in public transport, you just cannot move. You can't go anywhere, and I think that is really the worst. But just kind of show some sort of compassion, some sort of understanding, would I think really make a parent safe. Just say just a simple thing. Would you like some water? Can I bring you some water? Just a simple act like that would just I think really help to let the parent know that you understand and that you're not judging them for what they're going through.
Yeah, well, in such a condition, I, having worked with kids with autism, I realize how just simple and small things are so important and, joyful, in fact, at
Absolutely.
so many
Absolutely.
spaces. Just like kindness is on
Exactly.
point. And
Exactly.
yeah, I completely agree with just something as simple as would you like to have water or how do you
Yeah.
need that help? Like
Exactly.
it's just
Exactly.
a question you need to ask.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, all right. So that brings me to while reading the chapters, I could see that there was a lot of privilege. Like there was a lot of economic privilege, the privilege of like the accessibility to all the mental health resources that helped you sail through the diagnosis and have all the interventions in place in time, have the early intervention and all of that. Although all those things were covered up, and I just wondered what it's like you have worked with people, you have worked for 10 years in the field, you would know it better. um what would you say will work for somebody who's not so privileged, who does not have the information, who does not have mental health resources, who does not have economic, like what can we as a society, or like in terms of like as professionals ourselves do in order to like like let's call it a mass intervention, like an intervention at a very like at a bigger level. What is that intervention that will help or can help people in the lower income groups to have access to these resources? Because it's a very long time and a lot of expenses. It's not cheap. Like, at least first of all, mental health at first is not cheap, and then when it comes to autism in that space, the interventions are continuous, vigorous, and for long times, and also very expensive. How do you think we can uh, have these things reach out to the groups that need it?
So you're absolutely right, Malika. Yes, I was very aware of my privilege. And it is this awareness that actually pushed me to work with kids like these. Because I realized how easy it was for me to get an appointment. It was, I mean, I didn't have to worry. I didn't have to go without a meal to pay for therapy, right? So that is exactly what kind of pushed me to work at Umeed. And at Umeed, I had families who would arrive in a Mercedes, and I would have families who used to earn 3,000 rupees a month, you know, and I worked across the spectrum in that sense. What I found really works is so I should say this, that there are a lot of organizations like Umeed where there is concessions given to families. So families would come in paying up to 50 rupees per visit. Okay, not more than that, nothing more than that, but they were paid. The visits were paid so that they would learn to value them, because I think really early on we learned that unpaid visits are not valued. So 50 rupees they would pay and it would be fine. So there, like Umi, there are a lot of organizations all over India, and it is gratifying to know that now, not 13 years ago when Veer was diagnosed, but now I have heard and I have consulted with, because I've had patients coming in from different parts of the country, organizations in Assam, in Himachal, in Gorakhpur, in the south, different parts in Trichy. So there are organizations in much smaller towns where there is some sort of awareness. Somebody goes and starts an organization there, and there is that basic awareness. Having said that, there is not enough, right? As a country, I think we are very far behind in terms of awareness. There is so much stigma there is so much stigma associated with any sort of disability, um, or any sort of difference, whether it is autism, whether it is Down syndrome, whether it is cerebral palsy, intellectual disability, whatever it is, there is so much stigma associated with it. And there is one blanket word given to it: pagal. Any child who is different is pagal. And that is something which is so deep and so systemic that to change that will take years. But I'm very hopeful. So I mean, Beyond the Blue is the first book, I think, that openly talks about the experiences of an Indian parent in the Indian context. There are still families who will not talk about their 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. The whole world is seeing that they are different. Whole world, they're jumping up and down, they're flapping. You can make out that there's something different about this child, but they will not publicly acknowledge that child's autism. And I think that there is a need for more platforms like yours. There is a need for books like Beyond the Blue. I'm getting it translated into Hindi, and I've been told by numerous people that a Marathi translation is needed. And so I'm looking at that next. The Hindi translation, hopefully, I'm hoping is out by World Autism Awareness Day, because I really wanted to launch then. And so I really wanted to be available to as many people as possible, because I think we need to firstly become aware, and more so to accept that there are people with differences, and that these people with differences exist in our society, and it's okay, So while yes, I agree that there is a lot of privilege where I come from. To come back to your original question, there is now increasingly becoming little more access to people who are not as privileged. But before they can even access uh, intervention, they need to realize what this is. And for that, we need large, like you said, mass information and acceptance. Because people need to be made aware that there is some such thing as autism that is out there.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, as a society, the Indian culture is still in the awareness, in the acceptance space, and we are still figuring out what all is there, like how to just include the differences is absolutely something I agree with. So as a parent of a child with autism, and on behalf, like, I'd like to ask you this question, which you have answered of course in the book, but I'm going to, like, let's call it a teaser for the book. But uh, on behalf of the parents and caregivers of people with autism, like, what happens after you, like, what
Yeah.
happens after you, what do you think is currently happening to the kids with autism after their caregivers are not around, and what do you think should be the plan or plan of action, that, because it's a very very valid and very burning question, I think, for
Absolutely.
any caregiver of, in fact, any condition, but particularly autism. So what after you, what happens after you?
So, like I've said in the book, it's scary. It's very, very scary, because you are there to protect your child, to scaffold them from the world. You're there to make sure that they don't get taken advantage of. You're there to make sure that they're not teased, that they're not bullied, and then you're not there. So, what are you supposed to do? But I think once you plan for it, it becomes a little less scary. So, in my own case, personally, actually, Veer has voiced that he would like to live by himself. And this is something he has voiced to Vibha, our developmental pediatrician, and he has said that he wants to live by himself. He doesn't want to live with us, he doesn't want to live with his sister. He wants to live by himself. So, we are looking at options of assisted living, but he's still only 16. And so, maybe by the time he's about 2021 is when we're going to start actively looking at options for him, where he can get a little bit of support just to help him manage his life and live an independent life and work and earn and manage his life and have a social life. And I think he'll be very happy with that. In terms of other kids, the other option is that either a sibling or any other family member who is younger than the parents look after that child. If that is the case, then I think it is very important for the parents to let, as that child grows older, to let them start spending more and more time with the person who is going to look after them. Because you want to get the child used to those people and maybe even start staying with them once the parents get a little older, simply because you don't want for a situation where the parents die and then suddenly the child is, kind of sent off to this other family member or friend or whoever it is, because we know that kids with autism have difficulty with transition. So we don't want it to be a situation where a child or that individual goes there and then there are a lot of behaviors and it's very difficult, and it's very difficult for this individual who's on the spectrum. Why would we want to make it more difficult for them? So again, like I said, preparation is key, to talk to them about it, to talk to the caregiver, for the caregiver to understand what is required. Like, are you sure you're willing to take on the responsibility? And then again, to have the finances to be able to deal with it. So all these things are things that parents need to think about: financial planning. Whatever money they have, is there enough to have be put in a trust? Does the trust have to be? I mean, will the caregiver be paid, or will the institution which is looking after this child be paid? Who is going to be able to look after this child? Is there a vocation that the child can do, which will help them be meaningfully occupied? Because that is something which is very important. They need to be able to pass their time. What are they going to do? So that is something which is very, very important. And all these have to come together in a legal document, because the legal document is what is going to ensure that their rights are taken care of. So I would say all these things are very important. But again, like I said, it's a very, very scary thought for most parents. That I think it's the scariest thought, of what's going to happen after they die. But once you plan for it, it makes it a little less scary.
Since you mentioned, I would also like to mention very, very. You have put these points out. You've put pointers in the chapter where about future, and it's very, very well written, I would say, because it calmed my nerves down when I was reading it. Oh, we can prepare for things like that. So
Yeah.
that was very nice. Also, since you mentioned siblings, uh, would you like to share more about how was it like for Gayatri? How did you tell her? You've mentioned this in the book very beautifully, but how did you tell her? How does she manage? Was it difficult for her? How did she cope? And all of that. How was it for Gayatri?
So we told her, we sat her down and we thought it will be this big emotional talk. And we said, your brother, his brain is wired differently. He has something called autism, and this is why he finds it difficult to express himself. This is why sometimes he finds it difficult to make friends. But because he has autism, he's got a great memory, and his voice is so good. And okay, the positives as well as the challenges. And we thought that she'll break down and have this big emotional moment. She said, okay, can I go and read my book? So it was such an anticlimax for us that she was totally okay. We went for a tough time. We went for a tough time because there was a time when she found it very, very difficult to deal with him. She found it very difficult to accept him the way he was. She found it difficult to, really love and relate to him, and it was hard. But I think the switch flipped when we told her that he's your younger brother. Think of him as your younger brother, and that really kind of like she kind of really understood it after that, and she's so protective. She's unbelievable. She loves him so much. She's his best friend. She looks out for him. She's really been the most amazing sister he could have. So I think it's a lot of counseling. But even then, when he would annoy her, there would be a lot of just being there on my part, my husband's part, just to be able to let her vent, and to let her realize that it's okay. It's not that, like a lot of families, ye Bhagwan ki deen hai, you have to accept it kind of thing. Not like that. Of course, it's difficult to talk about it. So no conversation in our house is taboo, and she's allowed to say whatever she wants. Veer is allowed to say whatever he wants, and it's okay. Even if it is hurtful to hear, it's okay. Talk about.
Yeah, that does require a lot of being there. That's
Yeah.
very rightly said. So that so do you think, since like you have practiced for such a long time, you are a mother yourself, do you think a lot of pressure and work involved with kids with autism, which is a lot, like it's a lot, as I've seen, going to the OTs, then the interventions and all of that stuff, do you think a lot of load gets carried on to the mothers mostly? Is it is it something, have you noticed a pattern around that?
Yeah, I think so. I think a large part of it, from whatever I've seen, if the mother bears the lion's share, if both parents are working, it is invariably the mother who will give up her job to
Hmm.
look after the child. If that happens, it is the mother who also has a lot of mental health problems,
Hmm.
and who's probably has to deal with a lot more, and also it is the mother who sadly is blamed a lot, that it's because of you that this child is the way the child is. You didn't do this in pregnancy. That old Bettelheim old theory of refrigerator
Refrigerator
was
moms, yeah.
chucked out many years ago, is still very prevalent for a lot of families, and they still use that it's your fault. You didn't take care in your pregnancy. You did this. You went out traveling. You did something or the other. Or you didn't spend enough time with him or her when they were born. And those are things which really come back, and they are told to the mom, who is, as it is, struggling to deal with this. And it becomes very, very difficult for a lot of parents. I remember this one mother who had told me that every single day, her mother-in-law, she didn't live with her, but every day she would call and say, "Did he start speaking?" And that kind of pressure, you know, uh, I cannot even imagine what it must have been like for her. So yes, I definitely think that mothers get a large part of the blame sometimes. They have a lot of mental health issues, and the work that they have to do also is largely the mothers.
So, what is there anything you want to give out to the mothers who are struggling too much? Because it's very consuming to work with a
Yeah,
child with autism, and it almost consumes your own like entire life. Probably, like as an individual, you stop existing for a brief period because you have to just continuously work on the intervention, and also then the guilt, which is just not, even if it's not given, it's just there. Like,
yeah.
so what do you think? Something you want to share with them, for them? Any ideas, any tips?
So this is what I used to tell my all the moms I've worked with as well, that they need to take time out for themselves. It's very important for them to look after themselves and to have an identity or to do something for themselves that is not connected to the child. It could be water tending to plants. It could be knitting. It could be going for a walk. It could be watching Bollywood movies. Whatever it is, it's very, very important that they take that time out to be by themselves, and just tend to themselves. And the analogy that I used to give them, which is a very cliched analogy, is that when you're on a plane and the oxygen levels drop, is that, but this somehow, this analogy, I think, kind of just, they all, whether they've been on a plane or not, it doesn't matter, they just kind of sticks with them, that when the oxygen level drops, you're asked to first put the mask on yourself and then put it onto your child. When you are able to breathe, you will be able to help your child to breathe. If you cannot breathe, you're going to be of no good to your child. And I think that is when the penny drops. When they realize that I will not be able to help my child unless my own petrol tank is replenished. I can't move. Like I tell them, I said, "आपको पहले अपनी गाड़ी में पेट्रोल भरना है, फिर आप चल सकेंगे." You know, so unless they themselves are filled with positivity, with some sort of mental balance, with some calm, only then they'll be able to move forward and work with their child. Unless that happens, they will not be able to do it. I think that's when they get it. So that is very, very crucial and very important. And that is something which I've stressed repeatedly in the book. It is, and I think it has to be talked about as many times as possible, that they have to look after themselves. It's absolutely essential.
Very necessary. Just generally, also, I think
True.
women in particular
Absolutely.
need to have their own space.
Even mothers of typical kids. I mean,
Absolutely.
motherhood itself is an extremely overwhelming experience, you know, and so is being married. So I mean, I think it's something which extends to everybody. Forget about whether they're a man, woman, otherwise whatever it is. You need to prioritize your self-care.
Absolutely.
Now more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm at the ending final question of the whole
Sure.
conversation, very fulfilling conversation, and it's off the hook, it's off the book, just generally. I just gave you this question last time and you thought you needed time to think about it. But yeah, so here it is. With all the technological inventions happening around, it's a very imagination based question. With all the technological inventions happening around, people going to Mars, that being accessible to general population and all of that, what do you think can be made or is needed in the field of autism as a parent or a practitioner, whichever you want to choose? Like, what do you think will help in working through it more smoothly and easily?
Okay, I thought about it and I don't know what exactly this invention will be or how it will look or what sort of function it will have. But I think crux of why a lot of people with autism struggle is because they cannot communicate effectively. Or rather, they can communicate, let me correct myself, they can communicate, the world doesn't understand them. You know, so if there was some way to be able to, and we have, alternative and augmentative communications, there's Avaz app, there's Let Me Talk, there are so many things which have developed, which I think are fabulous, really great ways to help people communicate. But if there was a way, a more subtler way to communicate with people who have autism, especially the ones who are not speaking yet, because very often I have been in situations where I have thought that a child wants to do one thing, and actually it has been something else, and it has resulted in a meltdown for the child, and your heart breaks because you don't want that child, because you know that that child is hurting inside when that meltdown is going on. They're not doing it deliberately. So I think if there was some way to help them to communicate, I think it would help tremendously. And also, if having said that, if there is a device which can, or some sort of technological, and this I think is totally possible, it's just that we have to have the kind of give it priority to just make the public, like how you have that corona message, it took a coronavirus to get people to wash their hands. You have a message like that to tell people, about autism. I mean, everybody in the smallest village in India now knows that there is something called a coronavirus. You have to wash your hands and wear a mask, right? Everybody knows this because of that one phone message. If there is something which can just spread awareness and just build that awareness, which will ultimately lead to acceptance.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I mean, just when you talk about the communication part, I truly I relate to it so much, because there are parts wherein when you're working with the kid and it's almost you just can't know what they need and
You
they're
don't
having a
know.
meltdown and you're just standing there and there's a bridge that you need and it's not
Exactly.
there.
You don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for such a fulfilling conversation,
Thank you.
Gopika. I
Thank you,
hope
Mallika.
people are taking out a lot from this and the awareness is being built.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming here today. Thank you Lahe Lahe for being a tremendous partner. Thank you Xenia for organizing this, and obviously thanks Malika to moderate such a beautiful session. The questions I hope were quite comprehensive, and people can take away a lot from this session. And thank you Gopika for taking time out to for this conversation. It was really really helpful.
Yeah, truly. Like,
Mm,
I think we all learned a lot, irrespective of what we came here wanting to learn. So
yeah,
it's really like have a lot of
Thank
thoughts
you.
now. Thank you
yeah.
so much. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Malika,
Thank
great
you so much.
questions.
Oh,
Thank
Yeah.
thanks.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you
we
so
are
much.
actually trying to raise awareness about children's mental health, even intersectional children mental health throughout the month. So hoping that like the month, garners as many people's interest as possible.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.